Here we go. Industrial railways of Alston Moor and the South Tyne Valley have extended the boundaries of Alston Moor slightly, simply because the South Tyne Valley functions more or less as part of Alston Moor rather than the Tyne Valley, certainly as far as Slaggyford, and perhaps there's a sort of no man's land down to Cornwood where you're definitely into the region of the South Tyne Valley, going down to Haltwhistle. So almost all of the extractive industries of Alston Moor have vanished, along with their railways or tramways. There's Flinty Fell Stone Quarry, there is one coal mine still going, and that's it. Today, there are only two railways operating on Alston Moor. One is a South Tynedale Railway that serves an entirely different industry, the tourist industry, and the other is at one of the few remaining working coal mines in the country. Now, the idea of a narrow gauge railway on Alston Moor seems to be completely out of place in the north of England, in fact. The first impression is that narrow gauge has no business to be here. It should be in Wales where it belongs. But in fact, narrow gauge railways were all over the north, but mainly unseen down the mines, including here on Alston Moor. One of the most interesting aspects, perhaps the most romantic aspects of railways, is of course the motive power. And here on Alston Moor we had the lot. Steam power, petrol power, electric battery power, man power, gravity inclines, stationary engines, and there are also aerial ropeways. Now, the photographs of coal mines that you'll see are historical in themselves. I took them 25 years ago. It's hard to believe these things are 25 years ago, since which time all but one have disappeared. And I'd like to thank Pete Jackson for patiently converting the slide photographs into digital images. Pete is the chair of Nented Mines Conservation Society, and he is going to be our speaker next month. The coal mines themselves, I'm only going to touch on them very lightly because they'll be a subject of a talk in their own right, I hope early next year. So if you're all muted, yes, we'll have the question answer session at the end of the meeting when we'll open the floor to general discussions and any comments and observations and extra information. So here we go. Starting at the northern end of the area covered, this is Towers Bank Colliery. It was a coal mine near the hamlet of Eels to the north of Slaggyford on the other side of the South Tyne Valley from the A689 to Carlisle from Alston, on a site where there had been previous unrecorded small workings. This is the terminus of the railway. In the top centre, this is a rotary tippler that clamped the tubs, tipped them upside down to empty the coal into a hopper below. And here are scales for weighing the sacks of coal. In about 1990, side tipping skips were first used that were emptied manually into the screens. These were exchanged for the fixed bodies rectangular tubs to be used in the rotary tippler for ease of handling. The square tubs were obtained second-hand from New Branspeth Colliery. It's surprising, actually, just what a network of communication there was between the collieries, and the transfer of equipment demonstrates this. The tubs were regauged, 5 or 6 tubs made a rake. Each tub weighed 1,400 weights when empty. I'll throw in a little bit of technical information for the purists now and again. This is the top of the incline. It was labour intensive, the inclined plane. It had to have one man at the top, one man at the bottom, and one in the middle. Apart from the South Tynedale Railway, 25 years ago, in the early 1990s, the track at Towers Bank was the longest overground narrow gauge railway in the valley, running for a distance of about 300 yards, 275 metres. There were never any locomotives here. Gravity took the empty tubs downhill, controlled by a brake band at the top and a signal at the bottom. So it looks as if you're going to go over the edge of a cliff, but that doesn't really happen. You come down this incline here to the bottom. And this is the entrance to the mine with the air pump here and a bell signal there. an electric powered stationary engine at the bottom of the hill hauled the full tubs out of the pit, and a diesel engine at the top hauled the full tubs up the incline. How the tubs were taken into the pit, I'm afraid I don't know. It could have been by manpower. The track was single throughout, and being mechanically hauled rather than gravity, there was no need for a passing loop. A set of points near to the bottom, somewhere around about here, was installed for an escape siding in case of a runaway, but they were found to be unnecessary and they were removed. This scissors crossover, as it's called, as seen in the photograph, it's a real work of art. It was built in situ by the miners. The construction of the points with this single blade, as opposed to the twin blades of the other three, this single blade was inspired by the discovery of an ancient wooden example found in another coal mine, where miners were going through the workings of the old man, as it's called. They came across a set of old points, which inspired this, much more simple to make and simple to operate. So Towers Bank mine lasted from about 1986 to about 1996. So we're coming south, down the South Tyne Valley, to Slaggyford, the village of Slaggyford, and the railway station. The map shows the railway station, and just to the south, round about here, was an overhead gantry and a hopper to tip stone from Fell End Quarry into mainline wagons in a siding just here. A 21-year lease was drawn up in December 1906. It was revived in 1917 for the extraction of limestone and coal to burn lime. We don't know the motive power for this quite attractive little railway, but the route ran from its terminus here, the gantry over the Alston branch, through a very shallow cutting, then for about half a mile uphill through the fields before turning a sharp bend to the north and then reversing up to the quarry. The line appears on the 3rd edition Ordnance Survey map, and today the gantry abutment, which is here, and the short, shallow cutting where this electricity pole is, can be seen on the west side of the railway, the west side of the railway trackbed. Concrete bases on both sides of the South Tynedale Railway can still be seen. These were for the overhead gantry that spanned the railway here. Not far to the south along the railway, the Barrow Anthracite and Limestone Company Limited was established in about 1912 to work the coal and limestone on the Barrow estate. So it opened a drift mine at Blackclough, Littleburn. To transport the coal on site, there was an aerial ropeway from the drift mine entrance to the loading station, and a second aerial ropeway took the coal and limestone from the loading station westwards to the northeastern railway sidings at Lintley, which was over 3/4 of a mile away across the South Tyne Valley. Legend has it that the aerial ropeway was not a success. It was unintentionally self-tipping, so that the residents of Barrow Hall got a lot of free coal. And there's another story that one of the miners once took a ride in one of the skips, which would have been rather alarming as well as scenic. The northeastern railway sidings for the aerial ropeway, which ran along here and over the weighbridge, were in place from about 1913 to about 1925, when they appear to have been lifted. By 1938, when this photograph was taken, the sidings and the gantry on the main line had been disused for a long time and were derelict. You can just make out the cable of the ropeway arriving at the chute to load the mainline trucks which ran on this siding beneath. This is the shed which housed the weighbridge, and the scale of it can be seen by this lady here. You might not have realized she's a lady, but there she is. I think she's the wife of, I think it's Harold Beavis, a great industrial historian over in the Northeast. It might be his wife. He was active around about then. The remains of the weighbridge and the gantry foundations. The gantry foundations can be seen with little bits of steelwork still projecting here. There's a picnic area here, and there's a brick base of the weighbridge cabin. They were uncovered by the South Tynedale Railway volunteers during works to build Lintley Station, which is bang opposite this shed here, and it's a halt on the South Tynedale Railway. Another coal mine, also called Barrow Pit, was on the back road from Slaggyford past Barrow to Ale and Alston. In the 1980s, it worked the same coal seam as the original Barrow Pit, which is just round the corner, over the horizon here, and various other coal seams. But it had a new entrance overlooking the South Tyne Valley. But by the 1980s, planning regulations and the area of outstanding natural beauty, the AONB, had come into being, and permission to operate was at first refused. Consent was only obtained when the owner agreed to make the entrance blend in with AONB conditions. So almost the whole works were contained inside this purpose-built replica of a hill barn. Excuse me. The coal tubs consisted of the operation consisted of a rope-hauled tramway. Tubs were taken in empty by a stationary engine operated by compressed air and brought out full by a stationary diesel engine. The coal tubs had quite a story. At first, 400-weight tubs were obtained from Settling Stones mine in the Tyne Valley via Flower Edge pit near Alston and then to Barrow. Later on, 600-weight tubs were used, which were standard NCB, National Coal Board size. The chassis were bought from a brickworks on Tyneside and had to be re-gauged, but they were much better to work because they had individual wheel bearings. Mining started in about 1989, but closed only a few years later. The mine building beside the road is so well disguised as a barn that it's hard to recognize it as a mine. The doors are open, and the building is full of earth. So if you thought of it as a hill barn, you would wonder why an old barn would be full of soil. Coming along that back road, we passed through the village of Ale on the way to the A686 into Alston. This is the county boundary. This is the Whiteley lead ore dressing mill near Ale. It's included here because, apart from the standard gauge main line down in the South Tyne Valley, this was the only railway on Alston Moor to cross a county boundary from Northumberland into Cumberland. The lead mine that it worked was just into Northumberland here, just over the county boundary to the north. The Ale burn between the old county of Cumberland and Northumberland actually forms the county boundary. The site can be viewed from the road, and it's interesting because it had all the lead mine and dressing mill workings in miniature. There's a small reservoir. There's the leat, feeding for the water to feed to supply an undershot water wheel, and the remains of the building platform of a small crushing mill and dressing plant are here, and the abutments for the old tramway are on either side of the Ale burn, and the road to the lead mine entrance at what later became Ale Colliery. Ale Colliery is here. This is the entrance to Ale Colliery, where we'll go to now. Ale Colliery is a drift mine that had previously been a lead mine, and on the same site can be seen the remains of a limestone quarry and 2 lime kilns. In 1996, when this photograph was taken, only about 10 yards of track above ground were seen, and they were under the cover of this the coal screening shed. On reaching out by, the tubs were emptied into the screens by the famous rotary tippler. And what is of special interest here is the motive power. I believe all these engines are still there because the owner of the pit is an engine enthusiast. But 25 years ago, standing idle, there used to be a pony locomotive, this one, made by Oldham's, that was powerful enough, but the wheelbase was too short for smooth running. It waddled from side to side. The short wheelbase was designed to make the loco suitable to be hauled up and down in the cage of a mine shaft. There was also a petrol-driven locomotive named Tiny Tim, which was for a time preserved at the South Tynedale Railway, but later returned to the colliery. There were other disused locos on the site in 1996, one of which possibly came from Hatfield, that had rubber tyres, as you can see here, designed in an attempt to increase traction on gradients of 1 in 15 down in the mine. But the tyres wore out quickly and in any case were found to be unnecessary. Instead, buckets of sand balanced on the engine were used for extra traction. To transport the coal, some 1,200 weight tubs were bought from Blenkinsop Colliery near Greenhead down in the South Tyne Valley near Haltwhistle, but they were not used. More tubs were bought from Cornsay Colliery in County Durham, and these were not used either at first, but they did serve a purpose when they were cut down by a fitter at the colliery to make 900 weight tubs. This modification was possibly done on site or somewhere else on Alston Moor. There's another cute little locomotive here. They're almost like roundabout ride size locomotives. Another pony locomotive. There's scope here for a railway museum, really. This is a locomotive in operation. Two battery-powered Clayton-built battery locos, built probably in the 1960s, are in operation at any one time. One loco goes to and from the coal face with the tubs, while the other is on charge, which takes about 7 or 8 hours. Note the toilet roll here. Now, if you were told, if you hadn't seen this photograph before, if we weren't talking about Alston Moor, if you were told that this was a coal mine somewhere in the Andes or in another third world country, you'd believe it. But Clargill coal mine was on the opposite side of the Ale Burn from Ale Pit. The coal screens themselves had possibly been brought in from an abandoned colliery called High Row, a mile away between Ale and Barrough. There was a short siding on the other side of the screens. Hang on, oh, there's my arrow. The screens about here. A stone dump for rubbish that had unintentionally been included with the coal. As with all coal mines on Alston Moor, this was a drift mine. That is, it had a horizontal entrance rather than a shaft, a vertical shaft. The drift was 6 feet high by 6 feet wide, or 1.8 by 1.8 if you're metric, along which the tubs were cable hauled in and out by a stationary engine controlled in the shed here. And this little loop had a pulley wheel to control the cable. Yeah, they had two cable drums on the surface outside. For shunting, once the tubs arrived here, shunting was done by manpower. The motive power was manpower. The tubs, which had been made on site, were formed into sets of 8 or 12. The maximum load was 400 kilograms per tub. I haven't done a conversion into 100 weights. And the maximum speed was 5 miles an hour. A telephone lockout was used for the haulage arrangements. In the scrapyard or storage yard, there were a couple of stray metalliferous side tipping tubs with a U-shaped cross section. Now there are V skips, U skips, and the fixed bodied rectangular coal tubs. This has all been cleared away. The latest operation, it was an old coal mine that had opened and shut a few times. The latest operation was established in 1940 and it lasted until the early 1990s, only to reopen again in 1996, then close again after 7 or 8 years. So what's left of the cleared site can be seen from the A686 road to Hexham. Sadly, this gentleman died recently, John Patch Williams. He was one of the consortium that ran Clargill Pit during the 1980s. And that is the entrance to the mine, as we saw before, and the loop, the framework that supports the cable there. So, not far away, moving south, across the crossroads with the A686, the minor road from Ale, crosses the A686 at Clargill and goes across to Blaegill. The Goodfellow coal mine was situated uphill from the road, not far from the crossroads. This is the A686 here. The Ale burn is down the hill there. Alston's in this direction, Hexham in that direction. The crossroads are somewhere up there. This is the minor road going around the hill to Blaegill, and there's an old lead mine here. But from this road, you can see quite plainly the track line here. The Goodfellow pit was nicknamed Linger and Die because of its habit of repeatedly opening and closing, lingering and dying. That's a local wit. The tramway is shown on the second edition. Sorry, I think I require another mouthful of coffee. The tramway is shown on the second edition OS map of 1899 and the third edition map of 1922. The route can be traced quite plainly today along the hillside at a surprisingly easy gradient. There is one minor civil engineering work where a ditch is bridged by an embankment. The track left the mouth of the drift and soon divided in two as a siding went to a spoil heap. The line continued downhill for a distance, dividing again at the coal drops or staith for the coal to be taken away by road. Apart from this photograph, which I'm assured is of the Goodfellow pit, and the men there having their pipe and baccy break, no record is available of the rolling stock or the means of haulage or anything else. If anybody watching knows anything about this delightful little pit, please tell us at the end of the meeting. From the small, almost miniature size of the tubs, I would guess that the seam was very thin and low. Continuing along that minor road to Blaegill, in the Nent Valley, just above the hamlet of Blaegill, was Blaegill Colliery. The coal seam worked was the same seam as that worked at Ale, Clargill, Goodfellow, High Roe, and the others. It's about on the 1,250-foot contour, quite consistent. The latest working of the seam began in 1986 on the other side of a geological fault under Mount Hooley. That's the hill above Alston with the masts. Like the pit at Ale, the rails of the tramway only just appeared above ground before they passed under the farm track that leads to Blaegill Head Farm and then into the rotary tippler in the screening shed. The machinery and equipment for the mine was bought second-hand, while the tubs were bought new in about 1985. There were approximately 28 tubs in situ at the railhead in 1996, which even then, as you can see, here and here, was gradually filling with silt. In 1988, the mine was described as being in the early stages of development. Unfortunately, operations soon ceased when, in about 1990, the seam was found to be either narrowing or else it had hit a fault. The entrance of the mine was then walled up. The site has been completely cleared and reclaimed with no trace remaining except scraps of the perimeter fence. So these tubs, you can see, have hardly been used at all, so presumably they've gone somewhere to be reused. This looks like the cone of an extinct volcano. It isn't, of course. It's a spoil heap situated to the southeast of Alston, on a track from Natras on the B6277 road to Teesdale. The last working at this site was a coal mine, but it was formerly a lead mine. And in fact, in Victorian times, there were several coal pits, lead mines and zinc mines within the short distance between Farnbury Farm and Flower Edge, each with their own piece of track work, railway track work. There were two entrances, the upper and the lower. From what I can remember from 25 years ago, I think this is the upper level. All of this bric-a-brac has been tidied up. I think it's a pity, or it would have been a pleasure to have gone along as an industrial archaeologist and sort of salvage something. But anyway, it's all gone 25 years ago or so. The rails were spiked to timber sleepers, several of which were still in place in 1995, with others scattered around. You can see here the spikes, not chairs, but spikes directly to the flanges of the rails. In operation, the upper, older level of the mine was rope-hauled, cable-hauled in and out, as could be seen in 1995 by nearby sleepers. Here's a sleeper with the spikes and grooves on between the rails and outside the rails. They were rubbed by the cable, hauling the tubs in and out. And it's a wonder, if not a miracle, that the friction of the metal cable on the wood, didn't cause a fire in a coal mine. This is the lower level, the newer level, which is also rope hauled. A winding engine to one side of the track brought tubs to the railhead, where a rotary tippler loaded coal into a dumper truck, which transported it away for bagging or sorting, whatever. In 1995, there were a set of Y points inside here, which divided one siding for fulls and the other side to take away the empties. In those days, there was either a scrapyard or storage yard or both that served Flower Edge. Whatever it was completely cleared years ago. I don't usually wax lyrical about machines, but this is my favorite, an Imco rocker shovel. I would love to have one of these. It's just because it's so cute. It's an interesting machine, invented in 1931 in Utah in the United States and made in this country in Gateshead. The rocker shovel worked on compressed air. You can see the tubes here, to lift the hewed coal and load it overhead into the tubs behind. It had a little bit of lateral movement, but not a lot. There's one of these, I'll say it again, Imco rocker shovel, it's worth saying, on display at Nenthead Miners Conservation Society site in Nenthead. Elsewhere in the storage yard, there are these couple of intriguing little things. An experiment was tried when the colliery possessed two battery locomotives. Only one of them was ever used, and that in the pit, and that was only used for about 6 months. It pulled the empty tubs into the pit, and then, still connected, it was hauled out by the cable from a stationary engine along with the full tubs. The locos were built by a local electrician and the mine owner. Another innovation I was told about was a remote control that was adapted from an ex-milk float. Don't ask me how or what. But hopefully they've found a safe home. The mine tubs came from settling stones Witherite mine in the Tyne Valley, and tubs with a wider wheel gauge came from a brickworks on Tyneside that had the benefit of wheel bearings. And there's all sorts of things there. There was a microlight, there was a children's ride, the sort of thing that you find outside a supermarket. all sorts of weird and wonderful things. The pit became bankrupt and closed in the spring of 1987 after only 2 years of operation. The closure was thought to be temporary, but in fact, the mine never reopened. Across the Tyne Valley, the South Tyne Valley, on the west side, near Leadgate, was Rotherham, or Rotherham, as it is also known, a lead mine beside the Black Burn. This is the Black Burn. This is the track leading to the road between Leadgate in that direction and Garrigill in this direction. The A686 is up the hill, and here is the Rotherham mine, the low level. There is a higher level, which was connected by rail later on. It was disused at the time of this map. There was a short spell of inactivity before the Ville-Montagne Zinc Company of Belgium took it on. But here we see the dressing mill here, served by a tramway that came out of the low level, out of the mine entrance here, and the waste heap is along here. This photo was taken during the days of the Ville-Montagne. They came here in 1896 to work zinc, but mainly zinc, but they didn't turn away any lead that they came across as well. The Rotherham only produced lead. There was no zinc in this mine. From the photo, it can be seen that the mine entrance seems far too big for an ordinary horse level, which leads me to speculate that it might have been made for locomotives of some description or overhead cables. But there's no records to show this. It's certainly a very elaborate, a very smart, prestigious entrance for a lead mine. Here you can see the blacksmith doing his stuff and various other repair works going on. And this is the timber truck and man rider and the ore coming out by the looks of things. So here we have a hoist with what looks like a U-skip. And there are chaldrons here. Now, people from the northeast will be familiar with chaldrons. They're usually associated with coal mines. For a long time, Rampgill Mill was a very profitable concern, and it was reputedly the single largest lead mine on Alston Moor, if not in the country. Think of Nenthead as being a large concern, but there were several mines up there. There might be splitting hairs, but this was a single mine entrance. This wonderful Lowry-esque sketch was drawn by the late Mr. Willie Watson, a lifelong resident of Alston Moor, one of these wonderful people who kept their eyes open, who recorded things they knew weren't going to be around forever, and that people in the future would benefit from the knowledge of what was happening in their day. So this sketch shows the complex of buildings. This is the hoist that we saw before and the trackway that we saw. Horse-drawn, as you can see, another horse-drawn line here, and tubs coming down the hoist went along here. Now, whether this was a waste heap or not, I don't know. But there's waste coming out of the screens to a dump here by a little man-hauled tubway here, set of rails there. Mr. Watson knew the Rotherham mine in the 1920s and 1930s. He drew this sketch, and you'll notice that all the features are numbered. He gave a description for the purpose of every building, everything that was happening. The horse-drawn tramway, the hoist, everything had a purpose, and it's been recorded. So we owe a great debt to Mr. Watson. Coming back north to Alston, not far, coming back along the minor road from the Goodfellow pit towards Alston, this limestone colliery is at the top of North Loning, where there were limestone quarries and lime kilns. Just so they're orientated, this is the River Tyne here. This is the first viaduct, railway viaduct over the Tyne. Alston is down here. This is the road from Alston to Hexham and the road to Randalholme. The road actually crosses, although you don't know it, the road actually crosses a tunnel. This railway complex had its origins in a typical small agricultural field kiln, lime kiln, which was expanded in the 1870s to become an industrial site. The 2-foot gauge rail system serving the works is of particular interest because it was in 2 completely separate sections. The line along the valley side from the quarry to the top of the lime kilns was horse-hauled, and the inclined plane track, railway track, was worked by gravity from the kilns downhill through a cut-and-fill tunnel beneath the main Hexham road to the standard gauge main line at the bottom. The first of the 2 main phases of operation began in 1875, when the upper section was worked by horse-drawn traction from the quarry, horse-drawn traction, across quite a large embankment, then along the contour of the valley side to the kilns. The burnt lime then went by the inclined plane down to the main line down the hill. The inclined plane was worked by gravity to lead the lime away. A band brake out in the open at the top of the incline, somewhere around about here, controlled the movement of the rakes of tubs. 2 or 3 fulls going down could haul 8 or 9 empty tubs coming up, and the 2 rakes passed each other at a loop halfway up the line before the fulls reached the tunnel. At the terminus at the bottom of the lower section, the tubs ran through a shed which sadly burned down only a couple of years ago, around the loop of a track at a high level wharf or staith. The stone wall, as you can see, is still in existence, and it was tipped, the line was tipped down a chute to the waiting standard gauge trucks on a siding here. A mild railway accident. You can see the buckled track here. Now, whether that was a cause or result of a derailment, we don't know. This gentleman here looks particularly despondent, while this fella here with a hammer looks a bit miffed. And I don't know what the expression on his face is as he's looking towards this fella. And of course, there are the sightseers who think it's all great, especially when there's a camera around. Now, you note the white on the underside of the truck, which shows it's a lime truck, as well as having a lid on it to protect the lime from the elements, because lime, once it gets exposed to water, starts to fizz and hydrate, and you don't want that to happen. So from the road that goes from the A686 down to the sewage works, you can see the incline going up through the tunnel under the Hexham Road, and it's still passable today. This is one of the rollers, which should have, in theory, and often in practice, assisted the cable as it moved back and forwards, pulling the tubs up and down. But the problem was that they required a lot of maintenance. They sat in little boxes with axles. They needed a lot of grease. They needed to be kept free of silt. They frequently got silted up. They suffered a lot of friction, received a lot of general wear and tear. You can see that the cable also rubbed grooves in them, and sometimes the pressure snapped the flanges. The second phase of operation of lime kilns began in 1938, when the economic depression hit Alston Moor particularly hard, and a third of the population had had to move away in the space of 10 years. The local vicar, Norman Walton, who had more than a passing interest in geology, reopened the lime works at the top of North Loning as Walton's Alston Lime and Coal Company. What you're looking at here is the groundworks of Burnup Reservoir. And look at the little railway engine here and the tubs. Another shot of work going on at Burnup Reservoir. So when the work there was finished in 1937, its fleet of railway engines was available for sale. One of them was bought for Alston. This excellent sketch was made by the then 12-year-old Robin Walton, the son of Reverend Walton, who as a little boy rode on the steam engine. And this is the engine itself. Although I was told that the steam loco was not popular for the simple reason that it took so long, hours sometime, from lighting the coal in the firebox to boil the water to the point that steam could be raised to get the engine operational before it would turn a wheel. Sadly, during the war, so the story goes, one frosty night someone forgot to drain the locomotive boiler and the pipes froze and burst. It would have been too expensive to repair, so the engine's duties were taken over by a Ford tractor, reputedly the first tractor on Alston Moor, which could straddle the narrow gauge track, and it ran until the line works closed until in the 1950s or early 1960s. So while the tractor, which would start at the turn of a key or crank of a handle, was no doubt very practical and convenient, Robin Walton remembered that it was the locomotive that made a visit to the line works worthwhile. It was an Andrew Barclay, something, for railway engine enthusiasts. The working of the inclined plane was not continued by Walton's company. The line was led away by road. And with the onset of the Second World War, the mainline sidings at the bottom were used as a refuge for storing locomotives. This is the only known view of the line while it was in existence. The line here is here in the sort of middle ground, going from the kilns along the contour on the level to the quarry above Newshield Farm. Here is the river going down the South Tyne Valley to the north. Here is the 14th century tower house of Randall Home, and if we knew where to look with the binoculars, you could see Epiacum Roman Fort. This would actually make a very pleasant route for a scenic railway, if anyone fancies an investment. This embankment is quite a substantial earthwork. Newshield Quarry is through there. It was closed and became a rubbish dump, which was landscaped maybe 30 years ago or so. The track bed and of the upper level and the inclined railway can be seen from several vantage points on the road, but the site of the lineworks itself, including the kilns, has been landscaped so that nothing at all remains of the works. Of course, the biggest industrial railway here was the main branch line from Haltwhistle. What would normally be a sleepy little rural station elsewhere, dealing only with livestock and agricultural produce, in fact had several long sidings out of all proportion to the station's size for anywhere up to 300 railway trucks to deal with at first outgoing lead, then zinc and lime and roadstone and stone for railway ballast. And there was an ironworks nearby as well. Now just bear in mind this map here, this little coppice, this wood is called Woodlands, and it says Old Iron Mine there. Just bear that in mind. There were, of course, passenger trains. Here we see a typical scene in 1896 with the arrival of passenger train, with the local taxis waiting to pick up some fares, and there were always people around just watching the day go by. Very leisurely sort of life. So mention of woodlands. You can see these stones near the railway station when the river level is low. You'll notice that they're in a straight line and they are clamped together with iron clamps. This is the foundation of the west abutment of a railway bridge. While Alston's famous for its lead mines, other ores were also extracted, one of them being ironstone. Ironstone was mined quite extensively near to Alston Station in the 1850s, and even after that time, prospects for further extraction were still thought to be good. The problem was that although the ironstone of Alston Moor was of good enough quality to be smelted, the remoteness of the area, even in the railway age, put it at a disadvantage and reduced its economic viability or competitiveness. Woodlands was an ironstone mine situated in that copse of trees on the opposite side of the River South Tyne from where the South Tynedale Railway locomotive shed is now. The obvious difficulty was transporting the ore to the railway station, which involved a long, laborious, roundabout route to the bridge over the Tyne near the brewery and back down to the railway. Then, on Saturday the 4th of July, 1874, the Alston Herald contained a lengthy anonymous letter to the editor suggesting the establishment of an ironworks at Alston. The visitor had observed ironstone worked on the outskirts of the town that was being carted, and I quote, at great cost to the railway station. Events must have moved very quickly, for within weeks a bridge, which became known as the Ironstone Bridge, had been built over the River South Tyne with a line of rails. The Herald, Alston Herald of August the 1st, reported, "We had the pleasure of seeing the first wagon conveyed over the bridge and a new line on the afternoon of Wednesday last. I estimated the height of the bridge above the summer water level to be about 15 feet. Sorry, there we go. This is quite plainly the abutment of a bridge. It's sort of the cutwater, this chevron shape before you get to the line of the masonry parallel to the river. So this is the east abutment of the bridge. The railway had been laid overground for a distance of about 250 yards from the mine on the west side of the river to the main line on the east side. Unfortunately, nothing else is known about it, apart from the manager, who was a Mr. Phillipson. The line was probably using horses for haulage over such a short distance, or perhaps a stationary engine could have been installed with an incline because the standard gauge railway line was so much higher than the little line from the mine. A lot of people will have seen this lump. The footpath alongside the railway is just here. And you get this leafy glade looking down over the river. I wonder how many people have actually paused and wondered what this lump is. It's all part of the Eastern Railway, I'll get my words out. East abutment of the Ironstone Railway Bridge. The railway doesn't appear on the second edition Ordnance Survey map of 1899. So the mine, or the railway at least, must have had a short life of less than 20 years. We're moving now into the Nent Valley. About 3 miles in from Alston, at the Hags Bank bunkhouse and campsite at Nensbury, you'll see the gated entrance to the Hags lead mine next to the bunkhouse, right beside it. And it's also right beside the A689 road between Alston and Nenthead. Haulage for the line was horsepower, and it is probable that some of the surviving wagons are now in the care of the Nenthead Mines Conservation Society. Sitting on this timber truck is Amos Trelaw, the manager of the Vale-Montagne Zinc Company of Belgium, from about 1925 to the company's departure in 1949. And this young man here is his son, another Amos Trelaw. The family are now coal merchants in Haltwhistle. So here we see, obviously, the map. Alston is in this direction, coming along to Nenthead here. This is the crooked bridge over going towards Crook Bank. Hag's mine shop here, the bunkhouse, and the camper van site, and other activities go on here. All of these buildings, oh sorry, the house is still in existence. All of these buildings have gone. The mine entrance was just here. Oops, sorry. jumping the gun a bit. Whoa. So, technical hitch. The rails left the mine entrance, crossed the public road to the Bingsteads, the washing floor and the ore dressing mill. And this aqueduct, because everything depended on water power, it was free power, but it was unreliable. And if you had a dry year, a lot of work stopped. The aqueduct was only 11 feet above road level, and on one occasion it was demolished by a loaded hay wagon. Nensbury Hags was one of the last lead mines on Alston Moor, along with Rotherham, producing large tonnages of very rich ore from the Northumberland side of the county boundary between 1925 and 1930. The ore from the newly extended Hags mine at first was hauled up a 400-foot shaft, winched up by this headgear here, and then transported by a 1 3/4 mile long aerial ropeway. You can see the cables here and here, to Rampkill Dressing Mill in Nenthead. The ropeway didn't last very long. It seems likely that due to the nature of the boggy, unstable ground, the gantries or pylons that carried the ropeway tilted out of alignment after a few months, leading to its abandonment. These buildings are still here. These are now cabins for the shooters here, and there's another building behind the hopper. Some of the pylons survived until the 1980s or 1990s, and they were cut down, which is a shame because they were quite significant landmarks. Hags mine was used again during the 1950s. In about 1958, the Anglo-Austral Mining Company worked the mines on Alston Moor for fluorspar, but they gave it up in the late 1950s. And this is when most of the buildings at Hags were demolished and the site was cleared. Here we see the horse of the famous horsepower with its candle headlight, and the miner here is wearing a helmet that's probably made of leather. I might be wrong, but correct me or tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Nensbury Museum was a museum that didn't quite make it, which is a great pity. Situated by the side of the river Nent at Nensbury, it opened in about 1987 and operated for a year or two with only a short running track of a little over 100 yards in length. But it possessed a good collection of lead ore wagons of several different types and from different periods. The wagons have been described by R.A. Fairbairn in his book Lead Mine Wagons, published by British Mining in 1995. There was also a battery locomotive, purpose-built by a local pit owner and miner and a local electrician. The rolling stock was eventually bought by the now defunct North Pennines Heritage Trust and is now in the care of Nenthead Mines Conservation Trust. But what a beautiful little miniature Beamish that would have been if the dream had come true. There's all sorts of things could have happened there. The caravan site did happen. In fact, it was in existence there. And this is the little loop road that goes around behind the Jacobean mansion and rejoins the Alston to Nenthead road there. The most complex and the longest tramway system on Alston Moor was to be found at Nenthead. The network shown on the first and second edition Ordnance Survey maps, that's 1860 and 1899, served several lead mines, and it had the longest continuous stretch of track of almost a mile in length from the Rampkill mine entrance here, past quite a marshalling yard of sidings, to the ore dressing mill and settling tanks in the village itself, then past the waste heaps or tailings dams down the valley to Wellgill and the Brownlee Hill mine. This is a general view of those tracks. Rampkill mine is just out of sight to the right of these tubs here. The screen shed shows that this is the early days of the Vale Montagne. The old dressing mill burned down in 1905 to 6, and a new one was built. And that was when Old Peter, the village clock, Nenthead's Big Ben, was demolished. This photo of the line to Wellgill, there's Holmesfoot here, and this is the road to Alston and the road up to the school. This is the line going from Nenthead to Wellgill. And the photograph was taken from the top of a waste heap here, a massive waste heap, at the bottom of the gardens of the houses in Hillersdon Terrace. It was reportedly, well, fairly certainly removed during the Second World War for use in construction of the aerodrome at Carlisle. You need a lot of material to make a runway, and Nenthead supplied a lot of it. And these are allotments, if you like heavy metal with your vegetables. It was at Nenthead that there was the unusual sight of narrow gauge locomotives on Alston Moor. In 1912, some of the motive power of the tramway changed over from horses when the Vale Montagne Company introduced 2 new century locomotives bought from Ironside, Son and Dickerhoff and imported from Germany. I can't remember offhand the name of it. One 12 horsepower single cylinder petrol driven locomotive could haul a train of up to 25 wagons. Presumably they'd be the empties. But the other engine in the Goodham Gill and Brownlee Hill mines beyond Wellgill, about a half a mile down the valley, because it had to climb a steady incline, drew only about 6 tons of ore per journey. Now I haven't been able to convert that into tow loads. Here we see the crew, the engine crew. There's one English lad whose daughter is alive today, and one Italian lad representing the multinational workforce employed in Nenthead at the time. Excuse me. According to one writer, when he was describing the locomotives, he wrote, "Unfortunately, the fumes proved to be too dangerous underground, so the locomotives had to be restricted to outdoor work." This photograph proves otherwise. And it looks as though the locomotives were tailor-made to fit the cross-sectional area of the mine. The adit, rather. So on this map, if you can see it clearly, here we have the road to Alston, and coming into Holmesfoot here in Nenthead. This is the River Nent, and Goodham Gill Burn here, Wellgill. And this is the route of the tramway continuing from where we saw it. This is the waste heap that we saw the photograph, where the photograph was taken from, a bit further up outside Hillersdon Terrace. And the tramway, tubway, comes along the valley past a dressing mill here that was originally for zinc in the mid-Victorian era, and continuing along here to yet another ore dressing plant, but that was owned by the Walton family independently of the London Lead Company. But there's another dressing floor there. Both of these, of course, Wellgill and Brownlee Hill, disappeared many years ago. This photograph shows its age. It was taken just after the consolidation work to the Brownlee Hill lead mine waste heap, which was causing concern that it might collapse into the River Nent and block the River Nent. So the environmental work consolidation had been completed. Likewise, the revetment work and steps put into the River Nent to trap the metals, to stop them hopefully from reaching Newcastle. That there's more remedial work going on at the water from Hags mine now. But today, the old railway track is a very pleasant walk along the River Nent. And near to Goodhamgill, if you look closely, there are still 1 or 2 railway sleepers to be seen in situ. But really, this is, I'm afraid, the end of the line. So thank you very much for listening.
And there was a little stone building there, believe it or not, just the old wooden door, and my dad had the old key for it. And it was full of dynamite, and I remember him loading his cart up, horse and cart of course, and me and him trundling away down through Alston, down the main street, and up to Rotherham to deliver this dynamite. Can you imagine that today?